Hello, how are you this morning, Miss Valdez?
I'm good this morning. I had my coffee and I'm ready for the day.
That's great. Today we'll be discussing your child's scores on the Comprehensive Test of Achievement taken in last March 2021. And an achievement test just gauges what a student, in this case your child, has learned so far from the content, curriculum, and in the classroom. And it looks like your child seemed to be doing well the days the test was given. I did not observe any abnormal behavior the days before and during the test. But I just want to remind you that this is just a snapshot of what your child knows. It definitely is not a representation of all of what George knows. It's just those 4 days that the test was taken. And this is your child's test report. And as you can see, it's broken up into two different sections. This first section, or the top section, is called the norm group reference scores. And this bottom one is called criterion reference scores.
Okay, quick question. What do the norm reference scores show and what is a norm group?
That's a great question. A norm group is a group of students who are the same age and same grade who took the test before it was released. So the norm reference scores show us how your child scores compared to those students who took the same test. And for this test, the Comprehensive Test of Achievement, the norm group consisted of 1,200 children whose age ranges, 9 to 10, the same age as the grade your child is in, and it had an equal number of males to females.
I see in this section there's a column that says subtests and totals, and listed there is a basic battery and complete battery. What do those mean?
So that section shows subtests, which is just smaller tests within the larger test, and the complete battery is all the subtests combined, and the basic battery is just reading, math, language, listening, and spelling combined, but it leaves out science and social studies. And these right here, the number of items in raw score, the number of items is just like the number of items that was asked for each subtest, and the raw score is what George scored out of those number of items. So if you look here to the word analysis subtest, you'll see that George scored there's a total of 32 questions, and he got 24 of them correct. Now let's look at the category that says national percentiles. This column compares your child's scores with those of the other students in the norm group. So in the total reading subtest, which is this first one right here, your child scored 54% better than the students in the norm group. This does not mean your child got a 54 or that they got 54% of those questions correct. It just means that George was in the 54th percentile.
Okay.
And so now this right here is a bell curve, and that's yours to keep. And we can use this bell curve to make sense of George's norm reference scores. And so we can see where your child lies within the bell curve. So let's take the same score, the total reading percentile, and which was 54, and see where it lands on the bell curve. If we look down here where the percentile equivalent is, so it is right here in the middle. If we look there, those percentile scores range from 1 to 99, with 50, which is in the middle, being the medium score. And since your child scored a 54 percentile, scored in the 54 percentile, they land about right, like right here. And so he landed where most students score. They land mainly in this area. So he did a little bit better than the average.
That clears up a lot of my confusion. Now, what do these lines mean on the score report?
Okay, so if we go back over here, these lines are just percentile bands. They also tell us where your child's percentile scores lie, like the bell curve, like we just did. but they indicate the standard error of measurement, which I wrote up here on yours too, plus or minus 4. So the standard measure of error, the standard measure of error, which also we call SEM, is plus or minus 4 on this specific test, and every test has this. So that means if your child were to take this test again, they would either score 4 points above all their scores or 4 points below their score. And so just if we look at the percentile that we just looked at, your child's total reading percentile, so that means if they took it again, that they would either score 4 points above 54 or they'll score 4 points below 54.
Okay, the only column we haven't gone over yet for the norm group reference scores section is scalded score. What does that column mean?
Yeah, so that column just shows your child's scaled scores. The test makers get the scale score by converting the raw scores that we talked about earlier, using a scale to represent students' performance. So it's like the same scale is used to convert all of your child's scores from the subtest. And they do it so we can compare the scores from different subtests together. And it's kind of like when you're cooking and you have 2 tablespoons of honey and 16 ounces of milk, but the recipe calls for cups. So you have to convert the tablespoons and ounces into cups for your recipe. So it's kind of like that. However, the scale scores doesn't really mean anything, or you can't really tell anything from it if we don't know the score, or the scale, sorry. If we don't know the scale, we can't really interpret the scores. So you have to, again, look at the bell curve. And when you look at the bell curve, you look down here to CTA scores. And we see that the scales but we can see that the scales run from 200 to 800, with 500 being the medium. And if we also go back and look at your child's total reading scale score, it is 506. So he falls about in this range. So he's a little bit above the medium score for that subtest.
Okay, that makes total sense.
I'm glad. Now let's look at the bottom section. So this section right here, and if we recall, it's called the criterion reference scores. And this section tells us how well your child performed on each subtest. So again, this one was talking about how your child's scores compared to the norm group. This one's just about how well your specific child scored on each subtest. And looking at all this list of the subtests, is there any that you see that you don't really know or understand?
I'm not sure what the comprehension subtest is.
Okay, so that subtest measures your child's ability to read and understand various types of text. It's to see if your child can read and know what they just read.
Oh, okay. So it measures if they understand what they read?
Yes, exactly. Now, let's look back at the score sheet. And this column right here that says RS means raw score. And if we look at the punctuation subtest, so it's right here, we can see that your child's raw score is 10. So they got 10 correct. And this column right here that says NP is just the number possible. So it's just how many questions were asked for each subtest. And so he got 10 correct, and the NP is 11. So he got 10 out of 11 of those questions correct for the punctuation subtest. The cutoff point determined by the content experts put him in high scoring range. So if you see over here, there's low, medium, high. And so for punctuation, they say that he scored high for this specific subtest. He also scored high for capitalization, usage, and sentence structure, if you see right here. And so if we look over here in his portfolio, and this is his daily writing journal. And if you notice, he always uses correct punctuation. And he even put an exclamation point after saying, "I love going to HEB with my mom." I know he loves going to the grocery store with you. And he always used capitalizations for the right things. Like he capitalized the Alamo when asked like what kind of field trip he would like to go on. And yeah, he also uses compound sentences, compound complex sentences within the right usage. And so yeah, I agree with those scores. They correlate with what we do in class and what I've observed with him. However, let's look at one of his lower scores, which if we look over here, geography, it says that he scored a little bit lower. And so he got a raw score of 4, and his NP was 6, so he scored 4 out of 6 of the questions correct. And here is some of his work from the geography unit that we did back in January. Here's some of his work. However, first let me explain a little bit of what we did in that unit. So we looked at maps and globes and identified different elements such as tidal, cardinal direction, so like north, south, east, and west, and legends. We also identified major landforms and bodies of water, including each of the 7 continents and each of the oceans on maps and globes. And then we created maps to show places and routes within the home and school and community, and we shared it with classmates. So we did a project over that. And George did great during this unit. His work was excellent and he scored high on all the activities. And if you see right here, this is his, the project I was just talking about, the My Community Map project. It was wonderful. As you can see here, he used the proper elements and created it with accuracy. So I don't really agree with this score. It could have been by time those questions rolled around, he was tired and he just wanted to sleep. But yeah, I don't really agree with those. Mm-hmm. But let's look at another low score of his, which is over here. And it is the number facts section. And yeah.
Is number facts addition and subtraction?
We work on some addition and subtraction, but mainly we work on multiplication. Mm-hmm. They need to have those multiplication facts down and they need to be automatic for this grade. And so if we look back at the test report, he got 8 out of 12 correct. His raw score was 8 and his NP was 12. And so in class, I've observed through all the multiplication games we played that George is struggling with his 6, 7s, and 8s multiplication tables. Sorry, excuse me. And here are his multiplication quizzes. We can look back in his portfolio. I have them right here. We take these every week, and it's just like a speed multiplication quiz. And if you can see, he mainly misses the 8s, 7s, and 6s multiplication. So today I'm gonna send home with you this multiplication game and these flashcards. You can just play the game with him whenever you have time and use the flashcards with him every day if you can. And you can just pull them out whenever you have time. So let's say you're watching TV with him and a commercial comes on, then you can pull out the flashcards and go through with him. Or I know y'all like to go to Six Flags on the weekend, so like if you're waiting in the line, you can just pull out those flashcards and be like, okay, George, let's go through some facts. And just try to incorporate the multiplication facts into y'all's daily lives, because the repetition is really going to get him to memorize those.
Thank you so much. This is an opportunity for me to brush up on my multiplication facts too. George and I can learn together.
That's great. So I do agree with this score being a little bit on the low side. However, you and I can collaborate and work together to help George. So let's end today's meeting by discussing one of George's high scores, which was his vocabulary, and it's up. It should be right here. And so we can see that he scored a raw score of 16, and then the NP was 18, so he got 16 out of 18 of the questions correct. And if we look at his bonus essays, So after every test, I put a bonus essay, and he always does them. And if we look at them, he uses a variety of vocabulary, and it is evident that he loves to write, as we have discussed before, because he always mixes up the type of words he uses. He also likes to look up words in the dictionary during our silent reading time. So if he comes across a word from a book that he's reading, he'll go to the dictionary and look it up. So
George always says he wants to be a writer when he grows up.
maybe one day we'll see him on the New York Times best-selling list. Like, who knows? But do you have any more questions for me today, Ms. Valdez?
I don't at this time, no.
Okay. Well, take these worksheets. So it's just another copy of the score report, and then also this down here just has more information about the test. And if you think of any more questions, you can always email me or text me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You have a nice day, Ms. Valdez.
You too, Miss Monroe.